Yeah, we're not anywhere near that.
Listen, John's not here. We're going to Williams. He's our reverend. Okay, so if you want, we're going to skip around the you know, I didn't notice talking to a couple of heathens here.
Yeah.
I heard a gentleman right here was more happy than and we had two people be happy to do it and stick with it. You're so happy. I'm not one of them.
Okay. If we could come to order, please. Welcome everyone to this joint Planning Commission meeting of the MPC and IPC. This is a working session. I'm sure you all know that. It's meant for the commissioners and the staff and the tree committee to exchange information, ask questions, etc. I understand that folks in the public are interested. That's why you're here. We would just ask that you please maintain order. Try to refrain from interruptions. I know you're going to have questions. We have 3 public hearings probably coming up in the coming weeks. You'll have plenty of opportunity to express your concerns or questions at that time. It's my understanding we'll have a presentation from Commissioner Murphy, and Miriam Lancaster is going to give us a presentation from the tree committee. So we'll kind of go in that order. After the presentations, you're welcome to adjust your chairs toward the commissioners if you like. Save on that neck, and we'll take it from there. We're scheduled till 8 p.m. We're going to try and meet that target depending on where we are in the discussion. So I just wanted to manage your expectations on timing. It is a working session, so we're dispensing with invocation and the pledge tonight. Thank you. All right, Commissioner Murphy.
Good evening. Can you all hear me? Yeah, thank you for all being here this evening. I think this is a very important issue. I just wanted to start with a little background on how we got here. This has been a process of at least 2 years in the making. My predecessor as District 2 Commissioner appointed a committee at least 2 years ago that worked on a ad hoc tree ordinance for St. Simon's Island, and I think it's important we remember this is a tree ordinance amendment for St. Simon's Island, not for the county in general. So sometime after I was sworn in, probably 2 or 3 months later, the committee came forward and said they had their work product done. We brought it before a meeting such as this, and it bubbled up to the Board of Commissioners, and it was voted down. And that surprised me because I actually had 4 votes secured the night before, and those votes turned over the 24 hours preceding the meeting. The meeting was very contentious. Things were said that were not true. One gentleman who's actually a friend that got up and suggested that he didn't want to be put in jail for cutting down a dead tree limb on a tree in his property, and obviously that was not going to happen. So subsequent to this, Chairman Bill Brunson said he will take over the assignments of the personnel on the committee, and he did. And he put together a group of very learned and responsible and engaged citizens from St. Simon's Island, sort of a tree ordinance dream team. The dream team has been working now for a year, and I was told they're ready to move the ordinance forward. There's been a lot of back and forth between the committee and the attorney, Will Worley. And I think it's important to remember that not everybody gets what they want, but that never happens in a committee. Throughout my career, I've been impressed more and more and more on committees that I've served on that I might object strenuously to certain aspects, but at the end of the day, when the report comes out and the consensus has been achieved, things work out really quite satisfactorily. It's also to remember that this is not an effort by a few members on the DREAM team to stop all development on St. Simons Island. Just looking at the composition of the team, I can't believe that would even be considered as a criticism of the team. I also previously pointed out that other large cities, larger than us, larger than our county, certainly a lot larger than St. Simons, have very much more restrictive tree ordinances, and as I drive through those areas, I do not see curtailing of development, subdivisions, or single-family homes. Do I have the, let me see if I can move this forward. So, to bring us around to the point of, is this really what the people of St. Simons see as an important aspect of life on St. Simons? And I would look to the most recent citizen survey done in the comprehensive plan. And I haven't dug through all the data that I have in the past, but it's important to remember that over 600 St. Simons residents responded to the comprehensive plan survey. And this makes it, from a statistical point of view, statistically significant. That's to say that if you went out and got another 50 people to answer the survey, pretty much the breakdown of attitudes and responses would mirror what you see here. The important aspect is half of these people have lived on St. Simons over 15 years, and really they really want stricter guidelines for future development, and that includes a tree ordinance. And I think it's important to the citizens of St. Simons. I don't think we can ignore that, and I believe it's time to move forward with this effort. Now, why is it so important? I don't think I need to remind this crowd that the Board of Commissioners recently voted to really disempower the IPC and the MPC of certain significant aspects to their function. That is to say, they will no longer review subdivision preliminary plats, and they'll have only an advisory role on site plan applications. So preliminary plats have become an administrative action and really have no input from you all in the IPC, MPC. And in fact, there's no stipulation for public notification. That was turned down also. So what do we have? Presently, under the current ordinances, we have situations like this. I think the Harrington, North-South and Harrington Lane are the epicenter of very aggressive development on St. Simons. And this is just a couple of shots taken from one of those developments, and I'm not trying to point the finger at any specific developer, but it's not hard to see that about 90% of the trees in this subdivision have been taken out. This is what's called clear cutting. And certainly a tree ordinance is necessary to prevent this type of action. And I've spoken to Ms. Thompson, our Community Development Director, and she says with the current ordinance, things like this can happen. With the new ordinance, we would have at least some firepower to push back against this type of action. And really, now that we're in the era of the changed function of the IPC, MPC, I think it's terribly important to get some of these ordinances right, to get them so that our Community Development Department has tools to really sort of adjudicate or work with the citizens' needs and the developers' needs, and find a median somewhere in that. This tree ordinance would not stop this subdivision. I think if for no other reason, I would ask you to vote yes on the current iteration of this ad hoc tree ordinance. Nobody gets everything they want. It may not be perfect to everybody on this committee, but I think it's time to move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any questions for Commissioner Murphy? I know you have a meeting to go to or another.
No, actually, I had something that was going to delay me here,
Okay.
And I just blew that off. I just didn't want to go back and forth on the causeway. I'd probably still be on the causeway, but thank you for that consideration. I will be here as much as time will permit. And IT, can I just pull right out? Okay. Well, thank you for allowing me to.
Okay, I'll just ask.
Appreciate that. Yeah, any questions?
Yeah, before we invite Miriam up, any comments or questions for Commissioner Murphy? Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lancaster, if you could introduce yourself and your role on the committee for the past, I don't know how many years it's been.
Let me get this opened up while we do that. Whoa. Okay. I'm Miriam Lancaster. I am the chairman currently of the Tree Ordinance Committee. Okay, where did we go? Okay. Here we go. And I'm here to walk through an overview of the materials that you've received. You have a draft ordinance that was prepared by Will Worley.
Ms. Lancaster, sorry to interrupt. Can you tell us who are the members of the Dream Team?
All right. Well,
I know we have some here. I just want to recognize
those folks. Okay. Let me start with the members of the committee, and most of them were on the initial committee as well. Appointed members, Islands Planning Commission, Joel Willis and Stan Humphreys. The Mainland Planning Commission, Tim Murphy was our representative. From the developer community, Bill Edenfield and Brad Brumbach, and Bill was an addition that Chairman Brunson recommended after we went through the first process. From the Tree Advisory Board, Cesar Rodriguez and Charles Taylor, they both ended their involvement with the Tree Advisory Board during this process but agreed to stay on for continuity purposes, and then I'm a citizen representative. During the process, we also received a great amount of technical support from Dr. Don Gardner at the UGA Extension Service, who will be retiring soon. And we would love to give them a gift of this ordinance as one of his retirement presents. Our community development, Pamela Thompson and Janet Loving's the one who, I know Janet keeps y'all in line. She kept us in line as well. Having Pamela come on board during this process was very helpful because her expertise and her experience, the fact that she is a certified planner, was very helpful during the process. And then also Will Worley from the County Attorney's Office, who is the one who sat through all the meetings and then actually put pen to paper and drafted our concepts into the final document that you've seen. I also want to tell you that this committee met with technical advisors like Dr. Gardner, who was there every week. He brought us Dr. Kim Coder from the University of Georgia Warnell School of Forestry. He's a professor there who is internationally renowned as an expert on the live oak. We also looked at ordinances from other jurisdictions, and we reviewed the operation of our existing ordinance. Let me say that this committee worked really hard. There's no way that I can thank them enough for what they've done and what we accomplished. And we also accomplished it with a lot of collegiality. We had differing opinions, but we always worked together to a consensus. I don't think we ever had a crossword. We certainly didn't have any yelling and screaming and pounding of fists. So this has been a process that has always been to look to compromise and to the good of St. Simon's Island. Because it is a compromise, it is something where nobody got everything they wanted. For those of us who wanted a Hilton Head style tree ordinance where you can't cut a tree over 4 inches without a permit, that obviously didn't happen. For those who thought that there should be less oversight and more development, that didn't happen either. So we have come to what we think is a very reasonable conclusion. So let me go back and reiterate how we got here. I know that you've been called on a lot for extra meetings lately, so I will try and be brief. I will answer your questions as we go along, and I do appreciate the fact that you've come together once again for a joint work session to discuss this important ordinance. The ordinance, we have a tree ordinance that's been in effect since 2009, and that is something that some people don't know. There are people in the community who think that everything that we have done here is new. A lot of it is not. It has been in effect since 2009. But we went back, and one of the things we did as a committee was we reviewed the tree canopy data from 1973 to 2013. Now remember, 2013 was the beginning of our current wave of development, so even that didn't recognize the changes we had seen on the island. But what we had found that there had been a significant decline in the tree canopy, especially during the last 15 years of the study. So after we went through this learning process, we drafted a new ordinance. We had a special section on the Glynn County website where people could read the ordinances and also immediately input their comments. We conducted 2 town hall meetings with attendance of approximately 100 or more people at each meeting. We had a work session with the Board of Commissioners where we gave them the concepts we had worked on, and a joint informational meeting with both planning commissions at that time before the final concepts were adopted. The town hall meetings yielded an overwhelming support for a stronger tree ordinance to protect the remaining tree canopy and stricter penalties for violation. So the ordinance that we came up with first was submitted to the Planning Commissions and the Board of Commissioners in the spring of 2017, and it was not adopted. The committee, as it's now formed, got back together, took into account all of the feedback, the information, and everything that we've received to date, and we have now reached a new consensus, and that's what we're going to present to you tonight. First of all, as Dr. Murphy mentioned, the tree protection is an element of the comprehensive plan. It was then in 2008, and of course, nobody can talk about Glynn County without recognizing that our trees, and especially our live oaks, are a valuable natural resource for our visitors, for our residents, for our potential residents. And the comprehensive plan of 2008 was what that 2009 ordinance arose from. So now, 2018, here we are 10 years later, and we still have that same concern, and it's become even more important. More investment is needed to protect and maintain our resources. Our tree canopy needs protection during all phases of development, including the planning, construction, and post-construction phases. The county should take steps to protect the tree canopy from being impacted by new development. All of these are components of the 2018 draft comprehensive plan. So I'm going to talk to you to understand and not understand what you read on Facebook, but what's really in the ordinance. The requirements of the ordinance, if you are affected, what do you have to do to comply? The review process, who will approve what you propose to do with your property? And then the enforcement, what will the consequences be if you fail to comply with the ordinance? So first let's talk about the applicability. And where you see the italicized at the bottom, these are the additions from the new ordinance. Residential subdivisions will require a tree plan, and there's a good argument to make that the original tree ordinance that we're working under now did have that requirement, and our former community development director interpreted the exemptions so that residential subdivisions were not required to have a tree plan, and the redevelopment of multiple lots of record as well. Now, who's not affected? And this is key as well. If you already have an approved site plan, if you already have a preliminary plat approved, if you already have an existing subdivision under construction, if you're a homeowner and you already own your home in Sea Palms or Island Club or wherever, you are not subject to the requirements of this ordinance.
Ma'am, can you stop on that point?
Sure.
That's in conflict with the last bullet point, is it not?
When you mean it's in conflict?
So if you're a homeowner and you happen to have a house that crosses 2 lot lines and you want to knock it down and rebuild it on your own property, you're now subject to this ordinance.
If you are going to tear down your house and build a new single-family home, you would not be subject. If you intend to be a developer and tear your house down and divide your lots and build 2 or 3 houses on those lots of record, you would be required to have a tree plan.
Right.
So if you're a homeowner and you are operating as a homeowner, then you would not be required to have a tree plan.
I don't think that's stated in the ordinance.
I believe it is.
Could you,
It's your
Will?
your ownership.
Excuse me.
Let's
No,
make that an action item to clarify.
Miriam, I'm taking notes, okay?
Okay.
Will, if you could help us find that, because that's been one of the complaints, is that this ordinance, while it's been positioned as acre plus, it actually impacts very small lots.
And it impacts those lots when they're being redeveloped. And
Understood, but if there are only 2 lots, they're impacted, and we're talking about 8,000 square feet lots.
Okay, and I'll address that more specifically in just a moment.
If I could clarify just real quick, it does apply to substandard lots of record if you're building, if you have a house that's across a lot line, but if you are an 8,000 square foot, if you're 8,000 square feet and you're zoned R6, this would not apply.
So the 8,000 came from 2 4,000 square foot lots, which is typical for a substandard R6 lot, 40 by 80.
So,
And Glen Haven has about 500 of those, right? So we're talking about 4,000, 4,000. It's not even a fifth of an acre, and we're going to try and put this entire ordinance on that person. Now, you said homeowners were exempt. I don't see that in the ordinance. That is not in the ordinance.
The ordinance has a list of applicability, so if it's not applicable, then by operation of law, you are exempt.
But it is applicable to the example we're talking about.
And let me go over, I'm jumping forward to that slide. When you redevelop multiple lots of record, a tree plan is required when you have a single home that's built across multiple lots of record, and that home is demolished and multiple homes are built. In other words, what you've done is you are now acting as a developer building 3 single-family homes where one used to be. The tree plan would be required, and you would take those 3 lots, and across those 3 lots, you would preserve that 25% open space with retained trees, new trees, and those trees can be in your front setback, your rear setback, and your side setbacks, which do still apply with a substandard lot of record. The reason for this is, if you look at this, which is the GIS of Glen Haven, you'll see 3rd Avenue, and if you look to the left, which is to the west on 3rd Avenue, you'll see where substandard lots of record have been fully developed. And then to the right, you'll see where substandard lots of record have in the past been combined by folks who built a house across the lot line. And for their neighbors to still have some of that tree cover, it protects them for a tree plan to be required when those lots are redeveloped. The goal is to maintain the tree canopy and the neighborhood character to protect the existing homeowners, because existing homeowners have rights too. It's not just the last guy in who's building the new houses who have rights. Everybody has rights. So this was one of those compromises where we were trying to address a concern that came up multiple times at the town hall meetings, primarily in Glen Haven and in East Beach, where these larger lots are being larger homes, and people think of them as, you know, I have one neighbor across the street. They don't think, I have one neighbor who has 3 lots. And when grandma dies, her kids are going to sell the house and build 3 houses. So that's the purpose of this, and this was one of those many compromises that we think is necessary to maintain the tree canopy and to maintain some of the character and integrity of these neighborhoods that are impacted by these substandard lots.
Okay, let's clarify a little more. So it actually applies to 2 lots, not 3 lots, right?
Well, if you had 3 lots of record with one dwelling that crossed...
It applies to 2 lots. Right, and a homeowner is not exempted with the way the current ordinance is drafted.
If the homeowner is the developer who is demolishing the home and building 2 or 3 homes in its place, no, they are not exempt. If they are a homeowner and they keep that ranch house on those 2 lots of record and they want to remove a tree, then, you know, because it's too close to the power lines or whatever, they do not fall under the terms of the ordinance.
They are not listed as an exemption in the ordinance as it's written.
Because they are not listed as having the ordinance be applicable to them.
No, it's applicable if they live on 2 lots that are substandard. They're automatically captured by the ordinance.
No, only if they plan to demolish and redevelop.
Correct, and a homeowner could do that, right?
And if they do demolish and redevelop, then they're acting as a developer.
So if they want to knock down their house and build two more, but stay in one of them, they're caught by this, correct?
Well, they're not caught by it. The whole neighborhood is caught by it. The result is the same,
Okay.
whether it's a developer or whether it's the
Understood.
homeowner. It's the action.
We're trying to talk about the homeowner, okay?
Okay.
So we're regulating a small parcel of land.
We're regulating the action being taken
Okay.
to subdivide those former, what most people thought were large parcels.
Now, some of these parcels only have one tree, if that.
Okay.
Because they're 40 by 80.
Right.
They can't have a lot of trees. And yet we're going to require them to go out and hire a surveyor, a registered engineer or architect, which costs $2,000 or $3,000 to do what we're asking.
To redevelop lots of records.
Just follow with me. So we're asking them to spend about $2,000 to $3,000 to survey one tree on average. Why couldn't we just require them to put together a pencil drawing and work with community development to verify there's a single tree that may be impacted?
Wouldn't they have to get a survey anyway if they're subdividing lots of record and they're going to have new ownership and they're going to have two houses instead of
They don't necessarily
one?
have to get a tree plan and verify the species, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, so that will still cost them extra money, right?
It's part of the development process.
Would it not be easier for them to cut their tree down before they apply for anything?
Unfortunately, some people will do that, and this is another one of those compromises where if we adopted a Fernandina Beach or a Savannah or a Hilton Head ordinance, they would not be allowed to cut that 6-inch tree.
Yeah, our taxes are not as high as Hilton Head and Savannah. We live in Glynn County, and we're trying to maintain our standards, okay? Hilton Head was developed from the ground up. We developed over 200 years. Okay, so we have what we have.
And we want to keep what we have. And one way to keep what you have is to have these standards. As I said, if you look clearly at this block on the right, the people in that part of Glen Haven enjoy large homes on multiple lots of record. If somebody's going to break that up, and unfortunately it's coming because the commission never figured out a way for it not to happen, and people are going to develop on those substandard lots of record, we want to do something to mitigate the impacts that are coming in that neighborhood. And when we had the town hall meeting, time and time again, that's what people stood up and said, in my neighborhood, what are you going to do? Because I don't want my block to the right of 3rd Avenue to look like the block to the left of 3rd Avenue. I want my block to stay the way it was when I bought there. And so this is one way to help mitigate that. Okay.
I have a question or comment about some of the verbiage, and this is on the applicability. It's number 5 under 624.2. It says where demolition permit is sought for a building built on or across common lot lines or 2 or more contiguous substandard lots of record, which I think is what we're talking about.
Right.
The way I'm reading this, if I want to tear it down and build a house in the same footprint, I'm going to have to abide by this tree ordinance, even though I'm not building 2 houses on my 2 lots. I'm just replacing the one I'm.
And that's not the intent, and we can clarify that. It is the redevelopment was the intent of the group. So if you plan to, you inherit grandma's ranch house and you think this is not what I want, it was built in 1970 and I'm just going to tear it down and I'm going to build what I want, then you would not be required to have a tree plan. And that was the intent. So we can make a note of that.
Ms. Miriam, you know, we've dealt with substandard lots, so it's limited of what can be built on them now. Before, the picture you showed before, there was no limit of the size of the house on those substandard lots, just so they conform with the setbacks. But now, it's been reduced of what you can build on those substandard lots.
Exactly, and
So that should help that situation that we're talking about, But my concern on the substandard lots is that having a homeowner, whether he, now I guess you're saying if he has a house on 2 lots, he tears the house down, builds on 1 lot, he sells the other lot, then that doesn't conform?
Well, if he goes through that process,
If he's not developing that other lot, he sells it straight out, it will not conform. Is that correct?
well, didn't we say that if you apply to split those lots, you have to have a tree plan? I'm working from memory, but
Yes.
Right, so there's a couple of provisions in the ordinance that deal with substandard lots. So the scenario we just said, you have one house built across the lot line and you want to come and get that house demoed, you have to get a tree plan approved before you get your demolition permit. The other scenario is someone has multiple lots of record and on GIS they've been combined into one tax parcel for ease of sending a tax bill. They can come in and I guess fairly often do come in and say, I want to split those back up into 2 separate parcels. If you're coming to ask for that to happen, you're going to have a tree plan approved before you can do that.
because the assumption is you're splitting them in anticipation of selling them for redevelopment.
Well,
Well, and I'm sorry, I misspoke. There's actually 3 scenarios. So then the third scenario is if you're coming in and re-subdividing substandard lots of record, which is kind of a catch-all. It kind of covers some of those situations as well. So if you have 3 lots and you're combining them into one or that sort of thing, you'd have to come in and get a tree plan approved in that scenario as well.
So you're being, well, it sounds like you're getting penalized though for reducing density. If I have 3 lots and I want to make 2, or if I have 3 and I want to do 1. So if, I guess a consolidation plat would trigger this tree ordinance, if we took 2 lots, like in Glynn Haven, and made 1 lot out of it for the developer, then it's going to, like, well, if I got to pay that extra, I'll just build 2 structures and not have it applied to me instead of reducing density and building 1 structure.
It would apply in that scenario. If you're going to combine them into 1 lot, you'd have to come in and get a tree plan on that piece of property.
Right.
well, the problem with it is on a lot of substandard lots, and Pamela, there's some that are 2,400 square feet. Are there any of that small, or 4,000 square feet? And you get into the problem where then you're going to have to plant the tree out there by the public right-of-way, and does it become a public, the Glynn County tree scenario that, we talked about protecting that? We've already limited what a homeowner can build on those lots. And I think if we can have something where there's a minimum number of tree credits that could go on that substandard lot and not go through all this scenario with them, because it's almost, there's some of these lots you couldn't even build.
Well, you're still going to have that 20-foot front setback, 7 feet on each side and 7 feet in the
Right,
back.
that's correct.
To give you the room for the trees.
Well, it's just, they just need a way where the homeowner can make it work for them.
And we're talking about 2 trees on a
Well,
4,000 square foot lot.
yeah, I mean, it's not much room really. When you build the house, you have the driveway, you've got parameters of how the driveway is in relation to the tree because of the critical root zone. So, it gets into a lot of things where it's going to make it very difficult on some of these substandard lots. That's all my concern is. I don't have any substandard lots. I don't plan on having any. But I can see where it could make it very difficult on that homeowner. Now, we've seen a lot of substandard lots and the house fills up the whole lot. And, that's my concern is making it onerous for this homeowner with a substandard lot to be able to build something.
And then the flip side is
Trees.
for the folks who have to live next to that house, they have no buffer, they have no shade. And, especially if you're redeveloping, if you have, say, 2 or 3, which has happened a lot in Glynn Haven, where 1 house is torn down, 2 or 3 are built in its place. Remember, that tree plan is going to be for all 3 of those lots. One of those 3 houses may get 3 trees while the house on one end only gets 1 tree, or you stagger the driveways so that you have a larger area in the middle to plant trees. There's plenty of ways to do it. And the concern is that these are little mini developments happening throughout Glen Haven and East Beach as well, where folks are coming in, and because they're doing it on a small scale, they're not required to have any oversight. They go straight to getting a building permit. They go to GIS, they get the lots split, and then the next thing you know, all that lot that used to have the ranch house with the camellias and the trees is clear cut, and 2 or 3 houses go in the place of it. So that's the justification for...
Well, I just have a concern about making it very difficult for that one lot, 4,000 square feet, where they can't comply with it. They couldn't put a live oak on some of those lots.
And that's why the tree plan goes across the entire development, not just that one lot. You're never going to have a situation where a tree plan applies to one 4,000 square foot lot. It's always going to be 2 or 3, usually 2 or 3.
So if you have 3 lots, and what if you sell them separately to people out of state, or throughout the community, then you have to get all 3 of these people together to get a tree plan?
No, you would get the tree plan at the point, say you're buying my grandma's house, brick ranch across 3 lots of record in Glen Haven. Before you get that demolition permit, you obviously can't sell those lots separately till the house is gone. Before you get that demolition permit, you're going to come up with a tree plan. And that tree plan is going to say, here's where I'm saving trees, here's where I'm planting new trees. And then you get your demolition permit. When you sell those lots, whether you sell them directly to an individual or whether you sell them to a builder, that tree plan follows that lot. So now everybody knows these are my requirements for building on this lot.
So all the real estate people are going to understand and know that that lot has a tree plan that has to be abided.
It's going to be on that plat when you re-subdivide those lots.
But you're not. They're already lots of record, and you're selling these as lots of records. And their deed's just going to say Lot 27, Block I in Glen Haven, and it's not going to say anything about the requirement of a tree plan before you do any construction.
Well, there's obviously going to be a learning curve and educational process, and I'm committed to working on that. I did a thing with the Board of Realtors last year in anticipation of the tree ordinance that didn't pass, and we were already on the schedule. So, everybody has requirements, whether it's a HOA, whether it's this type of thing. You do your due diligence, and it's clear from the ordinance that if there was a structure there, there's probably other tests they might want to have performed if there was a structure there. Was there a propane tank? Was there a septic tank? Those kinds of things. So it's all part of the due diligence process.
For those people who didn't spend 2 years of their life like I did.
Actually, it was 3.
Well,
but it only felt like 2 because we had so much.
At my age, I'm not counting anymore. So this is exactly what a meeting sounded like that we had, okay? And you're saying, oh, no. Really, no. It was good in the sense that it boiled down to what if, until you finally got down to there's one possibility in the entire world that could happen once every 300 years if the moon and the stars all align, okay? And you went, wait a minute, okay? There is no perfect scenario for every case every time. So what happened? Well, we have a smart attorney and a smart attorney.
Former attorney.
Former attorney. You never give it up. You'll always
smart, but not enough.
You'll always be. And if we'll look, Commissioners, on line 573, if you have yours numbered, we have a variance section to this that allows those, when the stars all align and it's the one-off, it couldn't ever happen in a million years, but it did. What do? Okay, well, you might have to apply for a variance, okay? You might have to get somebody else, a little cooler head, step away from it, looks at it from a different angle, and gives a ruling on it. And so, nothing, it was said right from the get-go, there's never going to be a scenario where you're going to have an ordinance that's absolutely spot-on perfect for every person every time, okay? But all in all, this gives avenues to escape from. It never stops you 100%, all right, unless you've appealed and appealed and appealed. So in a sense, we've thought of a lot of things in this.
So that variance has got to go through this body? Seriously?
Yeah. No, if it's...
Start studying.
So to remove a tree, because we need a driveway example, by the way, the lots in Glen Haven, south of Atlantic, are 2,400 square feet, okay? If you're north of Atlantic, they're 4,000. All right. So we're talking about...
My great-grandfather helped build Glen Haven Baptist Church.
Good, I understand. And I own a lot of lots in Glen Haven, okay? So I know it. All right? My family lives there. I built there. I own personal property there. All right? So this is not an education. We're talking about not all the right examples. So if we need to move a tree, take it down, because on a 30 by 80 lot, which is all of Glen Haven, south of Atlantic, we got to get a variance, and we got to come to the IPC for a variance?
No, this is where we're spinning out of control. If you own a single lot already, and you are going to build a single house on that single lot with a 20-foot front setback and 7-foot side setbacks and a 7-foot rear setback, you go get your building permit. You don't have to have a tree plan. But if you buy a property that crosses a lot line and you intend to split those lots back into those substandard lots of record, then that parcel, 2 or 3 lots of record, whatever it is, requires a tree plan, which could be as simple as the house on the left has a driveway on the left and the house on the right has the driveway on the right, and all the trees go in the middle because you're looking at it in totality. You're not looking at it lot by lot. And so that's the way it's supposed to work. And I think that's the way it says it's supposed to work. And then the residents of Glen Haven have some relief from this relentless splitting up lots of record back into those individual lots. And you're not talking about me building my house, you're talking about a developer coming in and building 2 or 3 lots of record on 2 or 3 lots of record at a time. And that's the compromise that we reach. So yeah, if I go back and buy one of my great-granddaddy's old lots and I want to build my house on it, no, I don't have to have a tree plan. Should I? Because it's Glen Haven and there's a real need there to preserve that tree canopy? Yes, but as Tim said, you have to slice it. You have to draw the line somewhere. And so within the parameters of what we know will pass and what we think is reasonable, this is where we draw the line. Okay, moving on to homeowners. Homeowners are not subject to the ordinance. And here's an example on the left. This is a lot in St. Simons Heights. If you're clearing a lot to build a house on a lot of record, you don't have to have a tree plan. And this is where an existing beach cottage was removed, and clearly whatever's going to go there is going to be much grander than what was there before. And so they have taken some more trees, but they've retained some trees, and none of this activity required a tree plan under the existing ordinance or under the new ordinance.
As long as it's a standard size lot.
Correct.
Or a lot of record.
Or a lot of record. Right. So on the right, you may be surprised to find out that this is my front yard, where I had 4 water oaks, Joel says boo water oaks, and a live oak that were too close to the power lines, and Georgia Power was continually butchering them. So I finally gave up and said, just take them down. So this activity, again, homeowner removing trees on the homeowner's property for whatever reason does not require any activity under the tree plan, the existing ordinance or the new ordinance. So there you go. Any questions?
Can I ask a question right here?
Sure.
So you say what it doesn't apply to residential, I'm not talking about substandard lots. If it doesn't apply to residential areas in less than an acre, right? Okay.
Yes.
But under the tree canopy requirements, if there's a tree that's close to your property line that's a county tree,
Yes.
you have to protect the critical root zone, and that could be, depending on the size of the tree, that could go quite many feet into my property, and I only have a 6,000 square foot lot.
Right.
So I bought the 6,000 square foot lot, so I can't build really in the critical root zone area. Because it has to be protected. Or does it not apply to me because I'm less than an acre?
It would not apply to, you don't have to have a tree plan. When you have a tree plan, you have to show on the tree plan how you're going to protect all trees, including Glynn County trees.
I don't think we're talking about tree plan, or
I wasn't, well, it says tree canopy requirements in the ordinance.
So that's when, okay, so first, the first inquiry is always, am I subject to the ordinance?
That's my question.
Okay, I'm the person on the left. I bought this old beach cottage. I've decided I'm going to build something much nicer. I have my contractor come in and clear that lot. Doesn't require land disturbance permit. Demolition permit on the old house is all that's required. It's a lot of record. I'm not crossing a lot line. I am not subject to the ordinance.
Even though I'm getting a demolition permit, take down the old house.
Correct, because you're not crossing, that lot is a standard lot.
Okay.
And actually, I probably bought 2 lots, and the house was only on 1 lot, and now I'm going to build me a big house.
Okay, so on my 6,000 square foot lot, when I build my new house, I could build in the critical root zone area?
Yes,
Also,
as long as you're within those setbacks. The
Okay.
setbacks are what govern.
okay.
Okay, so, as I said,
well, sorry, Miriam, that's a good point, because under the protection of county trees, which is, all right, page 8, 624, property owners are required to maintain that tree protection zone, even though it goes past their own setback.
so, right. And if we need to clarify that, everything that follows from, you know, if you look at the flow chart, I'm applicable, it applies to me, it doesn't. It doesn't, I'm done. If it does apply to me, then there are these other requirements along the way, like the protection of the Glynn County trees. Because you're going to have tree protection out there anyway for every tree that you're retaining.
Well, this reads like for every existing tree, regardless if there's development or not. So there's an existing tree. If there's an existing tree in the right-of-way, county tree, by the way, you as a homeowner can't touch that tree. Only the
Well, you
county.
can, it doesn't belong to you.
Well, if it's, no, sorry, thank you for saying that, because according to Georgia law, if it extends into your property, you can trim that tree.
As long as you don't damage it or render it unstable.
That's not what this says.
And this is for during a construction process. This is not every day.
Well, it's not written that way, Mary.
Okay, then we need to clarify that, but the intent was that during the construction process, you protect Glynn County trees the same way you protect your own trees.
This is nowhere near that. The way this reads is for daily living, we got to protect the tree that's in the right-of-way, happens to belong to the county. You can't park under that tree, even on your property.
Right.
This says you can't even trim the tree. Okay, sorry, Caesar. This says you can't even trim the tree.
You can't prune the tree that's hanging on your property at all. You have to follow certain standards. You have to get the arborist out there, even if it's to
Well,
look
you have to
at
follow ANSI standards.
Even if the trunk is on your property, the critical root doesn't extend into county property. You can't damage that further.
No, I understand, and nobody wants to damage it, but they deserve the right to trim it if it's overhanging their property.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
if I could add, I'm not sure if my microphone's working.
Yeah.
today, so since we've had a tree advisory board, they're called the tree board, but most people call them the tree advisory board. If you call a landscape or tree cutting company and say, I've got some limbs hanging over my property, I'm worried about them getting the house, getting the car, whatever, that company comes out, and when it's a county tree, they call the county, get permission to do the work to make sure that it will not destroy the life of the tree. And we've had people violate that, and we have taken them to court for damaging county trees. So this is the same, this is what we're doing now.
Let me just say that in the ordinance, it says that you can't prune the tree unless you prune it according to the ANSI A300 pruning standards. So if I wanted to go out and prune some limbs that are hanging way over on my tree, over on my property, they brush my car every time I go in and out of my driveway, I want to go, I can do it myself, I can get a ladder, I can trim this, but I do not know what these pruning standards are. I looked them up on the internet. I couldn't even understand that because I'm not an arborist and I didn't quite understand what they meant. So if you're going to hold people to this, you at least need to put a link on the website to the county so somebody can understand what it is they're supposed to be.
And I think the ANSI standards apply, and Don's not here to guide us tonight, but the ANSI standards don't apply to, I'm taking the last 3 feet. You know, if it's something you could prune or I could prune, the ANSI standards probably don't reach that far down in the weeds. Well, the weeds is not a good example, but anyway, the ANSI standards apply to things like if you're removing structural limbs, there's certain places where you make those cuts. And the ANSI standards are supposed to be the standards, for example, that Georgia Power uses to trim. Questionable. But those standards apply to the removal of large structural limbs. If all you have to do is keep it from brushing the top of your car every time you drive up your driveway, that's something that's probably not going to even come into the ANSI standards.
So are we talking about ANSI standards or this International Society of Arboriculture?
The International Society of Arboriculture is the organization that certifies arborists. The ANSI standards is the standard that are used by tree cutters, whether they are certified arborists or not, and are the standards that are adopted by Glynn County in the comprehensive tree plan.
Okay, this makes reference standards by this body, international body.
Right.
And are those
Page
standards
8
the ANSI standards?
I'm not sure about the answer to that, but we can find out.
The pruning ANSI standards are on page 8.
Correct.
But, okay, if I hire a tree company, and the tree, like, you know, roads, if they're right-of-way, sometimes a tree looks like it's on my property, but because the right-of-way is usually larger than the road, I'm not sure if that tree's on the right-of-way or not, but I'm going to go hire a company, and I've got a tree limb, a very large one, that's hanging over the street, and I'm concerned about it, so I want it cut off. Is it okay if I get them to do it? And I don't know if they have ANSI standards or not.
No.
However,
So let me jump ahead.
Please. I don't know what to do.
Most people don't realize whether they have recognized the unit or whether they have I think we do need something, a regulation development to identify the trees. But when we did get individual contact us, they came to us, we sent somebody out and Dr. Gardner or somebody went out with the tree. They felt the tree was an issue. Or either the county undertook the work, they thought it was but the problem with not having any regulation is all it's able to us is have a week to live. I think there has to be a standard that we need to follow. And we are subject to that right now. That county tree is posted on residential property. We have to ensure that that's going to be done. And I think the only way to do that is to ensure that it's going to be done. But first of all, the county looks at it. Something is done. And then they
Okay, so let's jump ahead, because I did have a slide about Glynn County trees, and we may as well just go ahead and go through it. The countywide tree board's been functioning since 2004, and this was an issue that we had when I first started getting involved in community issues about 5 years ago. The tree board was there, the tree board was functioning, and not even the community development staff was aware that if they got a site plan that says, we're taking down this 52-inch live oak, but it was on the right-of-way, they didn't even think to call the tree board to get them involved in the process. So what we're trying to do is mesh the existing requirements, which everyone should be aware of but isn't, of the countywide tree board. And like I said, this is countywide. Nowhere in the county should you be able to go on the right-of-way and remove or damage a tree, because that tree does not belong to you. You wouldn't go to your neighbor's property and cut down a tree if it was clearly outside the boundaries of your survey. So why would you think that you would have the right to go and cut down a county tree on the right-of-way?
I think the point, Miriam, is if it has a large limb hanging in your private property, you have a right to do something with that limb. That's
Correct.
Either endangering your home or your car.
And that's where, as Caesar said...
And that applies to your neighbor as well.
Correct. You would go to your neighbor first, so you should go to your neighbor, the county, through the tree board, and ask them, because they make decisions regarding county trees. And in fact, if it was a hazard, they would pay to remove it. And wouldn't you rather have that situation happen than you have to pay for it?
I think we understand that, Marion, but we also understand the county has stretched resources, and getting ditches cleaned out takes months. So if we have a tree limb that we need attention, homeowners aren't that patient.
Well, again,
I mean,
if you can prune that tree without damaging the structure of the tree, then yes, you have the legal right to do that, whether it's your neighbor's tree or whether it's a county tree. But the tree board has jurisdiction over county trees. They stand in the stead of the county as the property owner. And so all we're saying in this ordinance is those rules still apply. If you intend, for example, the Dollar General site plan intended to remove 3 trees that were on the right-of-way for their driveway and sight lines, they did not run it past the tree board, and neither did community development staff. Tree board has the right, as the entity that's standing in the stead of the owner, to look at that, and they may have said, yeah, that tree's old, it's damaged, it's been hacked to death by Georgia Power, it needs to be removed. But you still have to go through that process, and there's no change to that process as a result of this proposed ordinance. The tree board still comes into play when there's a tree on the right-of-way. This tree on the right is a large tree in the neighborhood over by the Lutheran church that is on the right-of-way, and the neighbors heard that the new property owner was planning to take that tree down so her concrete truck could come in and pour her pool. When I was told about it, I got in touch with Pam. She sent staff out who confirmed that it was on the right-of-way, and so it was festooned with those beautiful pink ribbons so that nobody would bother it. I went by there yesterday, and they have cleared out that lot, but that tree is still standing. It wasn't their tree to remove. On the right, on the left, is the accreted property at East Beach, where a property owner started topping the trees so they would have a better view of the ocean to sell in their real estate listing. Those were Glynn County trees and should not have been removed without permission from the tree board. So that homeowner was cited for that tree removal. Okay. They were taken to, they cited with an ordinance violation, they were taken to magistrate's court, and I believe it was a $250 fine. Yeah.
Sir.
Okay.
Sir.
Okay. All right, so let's get back on track. When talking about land clearing activities, obviously the ordinance applies to commercial buildings. You're going to build a new commercial building, hotels, condominiums, all of that is what we're doing right now. If you are going to build, for example, Pilar Hotel across from Crabtrap, they had a tree plan. They had to get it approved with their site plan. Commercial buildings, condominiums. But when we got down to this townhomes and new subdivisions, that was where the interpretation of the existing ordinance got a little lax, shall we say, which kind of bubbled up to why we're standing here today. This is a single-family subdivision. It has already received preliminary plat approval, so it would not be subject to the terms of the new ordinance. However, if you have an acre or more of land somewhere that you are planning to create a new subdivision, you will be required to have a tree plan to go along with that new subdivision. And hopefully, that tree plan will allow for the retention of more trees, but if you intended to come in and do what's been done to this property, and then you have a replanting plan as your tree plan, which is compliant, then that would be approved. But we're encouraging folks to retain trees rather than remove trees.
I have a question about the townhomes. So if you're building a townhome in an existing subdivision that's already subdivided for those townhomes, those are going to be individual lots of records, but it's, one building with 6 homes in it, you are still going to be required to go through the, or is it only for the new townhome?
For a new, I can't even imagine where we've got a town where somebody's going to build a new townhome just out of the blue, where someone wants to build a new townhome development, they would be required to submit a site plan and a tree plan. Mariners Landing, for example, site plan or preliminary plat, no tree plan. You would have, and if Mariners Landing was built today, then because it is fee simple, which is a bunch of tiny little single-family lots, it would not be exempt. You would be required to have a preliminary plat and a tree plan for that development.
All right. One was going to come in front of the IPC earlier, but it was withdrawn. 50 Oaks.
50 Oaks would come under the existing PD. There's already a PD for that property that governs how that property will be developed, including tree protection, tree save, and so those, let me not give you a legal opinion, but my understanding would be that the terms of that PD would govern the trees in that situation because that's a pre-existing, and it's already been platted out as commercial, residential, correct, and the PD does address tree save in that PD. Yes.
Frederica Township, I guess, they have a tree.
They've already been platted, so they would not be subject to the requirements.
But they're over an acre, a lot of lots.
But they've already been platted.
Yes.
So they would not be subject to the requirements of having a tree plan, even though the lot is in excess of an acre. They're building a single-family home. They're building it in accordance with the plat and the covenants that are on record.
But this says residential lots less than an acre in the...
Residential lots greater than an acre.
No, I mean, right. Residential lots that are greater than an acre are required to go by this ordinance.
But if they haven't already been platted, if you're going to build a subdivision
I was just
out of the blue of 1 acre lots and you're not already platted, then yes, you have to have a tree plan. But if you're Frederica Township where you've already been platted, you do not have to submit a tree plan for each individual build.
Or St. Clair, there's some big lots in there.
Right. Okay. So, let me make sure I haven't skipped anything. We talked about the multiple lots of record. The requirements and the review. The tree plan, as I said, is submitted with the site plan or the preliminary plat, and it's reviewed by staff in tandem with that site plan or preliminary plat. So you're talking about when Pamela gets that development team around the table to review submissions, you're going to have the arborist there as part of that team. We're not talking about some person over here who's not involved in the process and moving the process along. They'll be integrated into the existing process. The plan shows the trees to be saved, the trees to be removed, and the trees to be planted. And I know there's some contention about how you do that and on what detail level that has to be. There is a provision in there for groups of trees being placed together. But generally, it's going to be the way the tree plan is now. If you've ever seen a site plan that includes a tree plan, for example, Dollar General or Thrive or any of the other ones that have come before the IPC over the past few years, you're going to see that same thing. You're going to have a sheet after the site plan that's your tree plan. The tree canopy is measured as open soil space. Now, this is different from the existing tree plan in the existing ordinance, which is a point system. And that point system was 8 points per acre, which equated roughly to 4 2-inch caliper trees or something like that. So we went through this process, and as Tim said, we know more now about open soil surface and critical root zone than we ever thought we needed to know. But if you don't have the open soil space to plant the trees, it doesn't matter if your ordinance says plant 1 tree or plant 100 trees to meet the tree requirement, whether it's 3 points or 25 points. You have to have that open soil for those trees to thrive. So 25% of your developable area, which includes in your setbacks, in your buffers, in your detention, has to be held open for the planting of trees. Now, if you retain trees in that open area, your plan is complete. If you're going to cut down trees, then you're going to have to plant trees. So that's how that's going to work. And the standard is 12 large canopy trees per acre. I read that this afternoon. I thought, oh my gosh, that's a lot of trees. Then I looked out my window. I have a half-acre lot. I was counting 30 trees, and that's when I quit counting. So 12 large canopy trees per acre, that includes other species other than live oaks. It includes cedars. It includes magnolias. We do want some canopy diversity because that's good for the environment. But you can find a tree that will fit in that space. The other thing is we talked long and hard about how much space a tree needs to grow. And if we had it Don Gardner's way, we would be leaving huge amounts of spaces for these new live oaks to grow or for these live oaks to thrive. And that was one of the real sticking points with the original amendment to the ordinance, was that we were requiring too much open space. When you can look all over the island and you can see trees that are butted right up against buildings and trees that have asphalt all around them. And what Don will tell you is, yeah, that tree is going to survive. First of all, it grew in a wild environment, and we put the built environment on top of it. And it may not thrive, and it may go into decline, and it may shrink, and eventually it is going to die, but we'll all be dead by then, so who can blame us? But if you're going to plant new trees, they're never going to get any bigger than the space that you give them to thrive. If they can't get the nutrients to push out those leaves, then you're basically going to stunt the growth of that tree. So we talked philosophically about, would we rather have a crepe myrtle, which is designed to fit in a small space, or would we rather have a live oak that we know is never going to grow to be like the ones out here under where the picnic tables are? And what we determined was we'd rather have live oaks. If you look at the shops at Sea Island, there are live oaks growing there in very small spaces. They are never going to be world-class, 20 feet circumference live oaks, but they will provide shade, and they're what we want to see. They're part of our island character. So those large canopy trees are what we want to put in those spaces. And they will grow, as Dr. Coder says, you can grow a live oak in a Dixie cup, but you're only going to get twice as much canopy as you have dirt. So
before we move on, can we ask some questions about that? That's
sure.
What you're talking about, the 25% and the 12 large trees.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to find out what is considered a large tree. Is that like a 6-inch?
No.
DBH is a large tree?
No, when we say large tree, we mean a species that is considered, and it's listed in the ordinance. The trees are broken down into large, medium, and small canopy trees. A live oak clearly is a large canopy tree. A magnolia, southern magnolia, is a large canopy tree. So when we say large tree, I'm not talking about it's big right now. It's not. It is a large canopy tree. It is of that variety.
Okay, that helps.
Okay.
Then also, this 25% of the development area after development to be retained as open soil. But
Correct.
Really throughout your ordinance, you've got 400 feet, which is 20 by 20, which is the minimum for each tree. Correct?
We want you to have, so that you don't have 10 by 10 here and 10 by 10 there, you have to have 400 square feet contiguous to be considered as part of that.
Well, then why do we have parking lot trees?
No, not
that
per tree.
Parking lot trees only have 180 square feet requirement.
Right.
And yet, I'm trying to develop 2 acres, I've got to have 400 square feet.
Right.
So why the difference?
Because, as I said, we have to find a way, and we may have a conflict here that has to be resolved, because we didn't want the 25% requirement chopped up into tiny little pieces just to play, to play the game. We wanted it to be meaningful, and we wanted it to be available for the growth of healthy trees, because without healthy trees, you're not going to get the canopy that you need.
Okay, if you go back to the 25% again, and it says of the development area, you go to the definitions, which I would suggest putting the definitions in front of the ordinance instead of at the end, so that when you can understand them better when you're reading through it, instead of having to flip to the end to find out what you're talking about. But the development area...
That's a Will. Look at Will when you say that.
I would suggest you put them in the front instead of in the back.
Okay.
But when you talk about the development area, it says all the land used in calculations for density. Density calculations are based on net per acre development and site coverage. Site coverage is based on a percentage of development area. So I'm a little confused about what this 25% of the development area after development even means. I think that needs really to be clarified.
Okay, well...
I really do. I mean, it just is, you've got too many definitions, too many cross-references, and it really need to be explained what it is you mean.
And I think the intent was that where a term of art has a definition elsewhere in the zoning ordinance, that we are using that same term of art.
Right, but in the last ordinance you presented to us last year, it had gross development area. So, and that's been taken out. So I still think it's unclear, because if I have 2 acres and I go through and I want to build, so I have to have 24 trees, 2 acres, I need 24 trees. That's based on the gross acreage.
Correct.
I have, right? So, okay, according to this, so I have to have 24 trees, but I also have to have 25% of open soil.
To put those trees in, or to keep those trees.
Right.
Those existing trees.
But 24 trees times 400 square feet is 9,600 square feet. So, if I break it up and if I want 7 lots in there, which I can put in there with a road, I'm a little confused about whether I'm going to take the lots, my 7 lots and my 1,000 square feet for a road, and that's going to be my after development area. Then do I do 25% of the remainder, which would only be 530 square feet? So that's why I'm a little confused about how it all works out.
Okay.
The 25% in the development area.
And I think that's something that Will needs to clarify in the drafting, because when you talk about, and you raise a good point, when you talk about if I'm taking my 2 acres and it's zoned R6 and I'm in Harrington and I do have to have a road, and that's part of my development, that's a little different than what our brains were thinking about. I have a 1 acre lot and I'm building a fast food restaurant, and so I'm not building any roads, I'm building driveways and pavement, and all of that is part of my developable area. So we may have to finesse that definition for the residential component.
I think so.
Okay.
It's just not clear.
I might be able to provide a little bit of clarity on some of these things. I appreciate the suggestion about definitions. It was in the beginning, in the first draft that went through last year, and then we were told, a lot of the feedback we got was, this thing's hard to read, you don't get to the meat of the ordinance soon enough because there's this big block of definitions in the front.
The only people who want them at the front are the lawyers, and everybody else is like, I'm going to read the ordinance, and if I need to know what it means, I'll look it up later.
Okay, I defer.
It's like footnotes,
That's a good point. So Miriam's right. This definition of development area is the one that's currently in our ordinance. And I think in the example that you used before, when you look at development area, staff goes through, and if you look at the definition, they say, okay, if there's water to the state, if there's jurisdictional wetlands, if there are these setback lines for the beach and dune, et cetera, we don't count that toward your development area.
And this is the same definition as in the
Right.
zoning area. But in the zoning area, you know, you're dealing with a net development per acre for density, okay? You deal with a net development for the rooms and the density.
Right.
Per acre. And then on the site coverage, you deal with the percentage of the site coverage. So those are the two things that go into the development area. And so we go back over here, 25% of the development area after the development. So what does that mean exactly?
So the percentage and the net you're talking about is, it's like for instance, for site coverage, it is a percentage, but it's a percentage of your development area. So they calculate the development area first and then say, okay, you can only build over a certain percentage of that development area.
Right.
And Pam and Stephanie would be able to address how they calculate development area better than I could. The reason gross was taken out was because it seemed a bit redundant, because really what you're doing is when you calculate the development area, that's the calculation. So if you say gross, that makes it sound as if there's some other calculation that should
Okay.
happen as well.
But then again, you know, my density, I have 2 acres, that's gross. I have 2 acres, that's my gross, right? I have to have 24 trees. Okay? Well, if I'm only talking about the development area and 25% open soil, then I shouldn't have to have 12 trees, because I wouldn't have enough left over after the development area, right?
Right, so, and again, I'll let
That's why it's
the ones that work with it every day, but I think they take your 2 acres, anything that would be excluded from your development area, according to our definition, they take out. So let's just say that reduces it by 500 square feet, or half an acre, let me say that. Now you got 1.5 development acres.
Okay.
Then you take your 25% of that, and then whatever pro rata number of trees you have to do to fill that space, which would be 18.
Okay, so the 12 large trees is actually per net acre of development?
Ms. Watson, if I could chime in here, I actually did an example we're going to bring forward to y'all at the public hearings today. I looked at Captain Cove subdivision. Now, again, it's existing, it wouldn't apply to it. But the total parcel is a little over 10 acres. But they have some wetlands on the property. They have some of the things that don't qualify for counting. So after I removed those areas, the development area was approximately 8.2 acres. So I took 25% of that, and that came up with the 2.1 acres that need to be open soil for that site. And then I took the 8.2 acres and multiplied that by 12 to come up with 106 trees.
Okay.
And remember too, when you're taking a subdivision and you're starting from scratch, like Captain's Cove, where you had raw acreage, you're deciding where to put your roads and you're dividing up your lots so each lot is a buildable lot, you don't have to put the same number of trees on each lot. You can always put trees in the buffers, you can put trees in the common areas, you could put trees along these wetlands. So it's not that we're talking about a cookie cutter approach. What we want is a holistic approach where you look at that site, and if you have some lovely specimen trees, there's a little neighborhood off of Ramsey Lane off of North Harrington. If you go into Ramsey Lane, they have 5 or 6 large specimen trees that we've actually measured and registered with the Live Oak Society. So one guy has got this champion tree in his front yard. And then they have another very large tree that's in the green space of one of their cul-de-sacs. So if that was being built today, they would get credit for the open soil area that they've left for that tree in the cul-de-sac, which is a beautiful, healthy tree. And then they also have some common area along Ramsey Lane where it abuts the next piece of property, and they've got 2 rather large live oaks there. So it's not going to be, well, let's put, let's divide it among, if we have 20 lots and we have to have 120 trees, that every lot's going to get 6 trees.
I understand
want to look at it holistically.
Okay. But I have just one other comment. The open soil areas in your ordinance says it may be planted, but in the definition section in the back, it says that open soil areas has to be undisturbed. So I'm a little confused there, too. I mean, it's planted, but it's undisturbed?
Well, it's undisturbed in the sense that you don't have any construction there, you don't have any permanent structures there, but it can be planted with azaleas, ground cover, or whatever.
Well, then I think the definition probably needs to be clarified
Okay,
of what open soil is, because the definition says undisturbed.
okay.
Could I get a clarification from Will on one thing on the applicability? This is on page 2, it's number 3. It's only 3 lines long, but this goes back to my 1 acre residential lot, and would that exempt an existing lot of record that's 1 acre? Because the way I read it, it would not.
You're saying A3?
Yes.
Right, so the first exemption under subsection B are single-family residential standard lots of record that appear on a preliminary plat or final plat approved prior to the adoption of the tree ordinance. So that exempts you from the ordinance completely. So if your lot and is 2 acres and it's on a preliminary plat or final plat that's already been approved before this ordinance were to be adopted, you're exempt from the ordinance.
Even though it says if such residential property is 1 acre or larger in area.
Right, because the exemption, we lay out, as Miriam said, these are the things that it applies to. And then by operation of law, if you're not in that list, it doesn't apply to you. So the exemptions are, okay, well, let's take that list of situations where it applies and now say, well, okay, you may fall into that category, but in some instances, you still don't have to comply with this ordinance. And so the exemption for single-family standard lots that are already on an approved preliminary plat or final plat is an exemption from number 3 above it.
Okay. I know we write a lot of ordinances, and we thought we understood them completely when they were approved, and 2 years later, something comes up, and it's like it wasn't clear at all. And I'm just concerned about that particular thing. But there's a couple of references in here where it says, like, no trees will be removed, or the removal of any tree. I can't take out a 2-inch pine, or do we need a definition of any tree? They mentioned a tree in here, that's a 6-inch large canopy tree, because it says any tree.
And you're referring to that you can't remove any tree until you have a tree plan approved? Is that?
Do you have a specific area?
It was on page 3. It says building permits, site plans, existing structures, wherein certifies that no trees will be removed.
Right, until you've been through the process.
Right. What about a 6-inch pine or
the way it is worded now, and the reason for that is we don't want that, as Chairman Duncan mentioned, well, I'm just going to cut them all down before I come see you for my permits. You can't remove the trees until you get your tree plan. I have seen in other ordinances, and this is when you're dealing with large tracts of land, that there is an exemption for clearing land, to go in there and see what you've got, to remove underbrush and that kind of thing.
bush hog?
Bush hog, as long as it doesn't damage the trees. But the key here is, particularly on St. Simon's, when you're dealing with property, for example, the property across from Brogan's North, it's been for sale forever, it's zoned commercial. You don't want somebody coming in there before they go for their site plan, before they do any of that, and removing the trees, and then saying, oh, sorry, I don't have any trees. So that was the intent of that section, is that it is a violation of this ordinance to remove trees before you come and get those approvals.
If it's less than an acre, it's okay.
Well, if it's less than an acre and it's residential.
What says commercial in here? Commercial and residential.
Where is that?
So
On page 3.
I might be able to clarify and suggest a possible
I'm just
solution.
saying tree size, whether it's 2-inch or it's a 6-inch large canopy.
So, again, the exemptions have to be read in conjunction with the situations in which the ordinance applies. So the exemption that you're pointing out is meant to apply that if you go and look at what the ordinance applies to, if you're in that situation and you're going to have to get a building permit or a site plan, and you're going to have to get a tree plan as a part of that, you can look to these exemptions and say, okay, well, if I'm getting a building permit but I'm not touching any trees, then you don't have to go back through the process again. So it's not meant to apply, again, you have to go back and look at the list of 7 situations in which it applies. These are exemptions for those 7 situations. These exemptions are not meant to be read as, well, we're exempting you, you don't have to exempt situations that this doesn't apply to.
I was just wanting a definition. When they talked about a removal of a tree, it should be 4 inches, 6 inches and larger.
I think a tree is defined as, isn't the tree?
And let me maybe suggest a way to clarify, because I'm looking back at 624.2A.
3 inches.
And before we list the 7 situations in which the ordinance applies, I wrote, these are the sites requiring an approved tree plan. And maybe that's narrowing it a little bit too much. Maybe we need to say there that are subject to this ordinance, because it sounds like a lot of the confusion is when you look at the exemptions, does that apply just to getting a tree plan, or does it apply to everything?
Right. And I think, too, that part of the implementation will be for Pamela and her group to come up with a flow chart that says, if this, then this. And that's something that needs to be distributed, that, this will result really in, other than the calculation methodology, it's going to affect residential development.
Okay, can I jump into, on that same page, number 2, under number 3, it's all one sentence, and it appears the first part of the sentence says it applies to commercial, and the second part of the sentence says, but if it's zoned residential and it's less than and more than 1 acre, so just reading that quickly, one would think it applies to commercial less than, not less, it has to be greater than 1 acre, and the less than 1 acre commercial it doesn't apply. I would suggest that you break that down into 2 sentences so that it's not confusing.
Right. Okay. All right.
That was not the intent to do less than 1 acre on commercial, right?
Correct. Commercial is now and will in the future require a tree plan.
Right. So that needs to be clarified, if you would.
Okay.
2 sentences.
Okay.
And if I could, there was a question you asked Desiree earlier that I don't think we answered about parking lot trees. Why they? So that was one of the compromises that Miriam referred to earlier. Is we had Mr. Edenfield, using the Shops at Sienna example, said, well, under this ordinance, we wouldn't be able to put these trees in parking lots. And so that was a compromise meant to allow those kinds of things.
But since you're compromising, why couldn't those, you limit it to like 1/3 of the tree canopy requirement. Why couldn't it just be part of it? Why just limit it?
I think the reason why is we wanted more trees in parking lots. And you knew if you have 400 square feet for the tree, you're not going to have any parking. So it was a compromise to get more trees.
Right.
It takes 3 trees in a parking lot to count as 1 for the tree credit. That was the reason.
Right, but you don't want parking lot trees to be the only trees.
Right.
You want other trees as well. And one of the newer trends in development is to have some tree islands at the entrance to the store. We were down in Fort Lauderdale, and they have a beautiful Walmart that has a landscaped area between the parking lot and the entrance to the store. Provides shade for people who are waiting for somebody to come pick them up. It's a traffic calming device. There's a lot of different things that you can do, and we want to encourage people to leave that open space in as large a piece of open space as you can to get the biggest trees that you can, because that's what we're all about, is the mature live oak. Okay, so moving on, how are we doing on time, Chairman?
It is 7:30.
Okay, we've already...
I'd like to reserve at least 15 minutes for the commissions to discuss it.
Okay.
So if you can kind of gauge the time accordingly.
I can move it along, and we've already talked about the Glynn County trees, so that'll get us past that slide. All right, so, as I said, your tree plan is considered with your site plan or your preliminary plat. Now, as of last Thursday, we had to make a little adjustment here. Depending on who the approver of your preliminary plat is now, community development, site plans still rest with the commission, the planning commissions. So the community development director is going to be the approver of tree plans that accompany a preliminary plat, and the IPC will be the approver of a tree plan that accompanies a site plan, which is what we're doing today with commercial and hotel and condominiums. There is a whole section on variances because, as Tim Murphy said, there is no one-size-fits-all, but you cannot legislate for the million and one reason. You have to try and create some boxes and then create the ability to grant variances. Those variances could be approved on the tree plan itself, and this is something we discussed with Mr. Edenfield, his concerns about the redevelopment of properties where you already have large trees near the property, and you can't make a tree protection zone in a perfect circle because the building's there or the building's going to be there. So that's one example where on your tree plan you would show my tree protection zone is going to look like, it's going to be a semicircle, it's not going to be a full circle, or it's going to be a box, it's not going to be a circle. And all of those variances would get worked through and approved on that tree plan. And then again, if a tree plan is rejected for any reason, and the philosophy is that you would never have a rejected tree plan. If you have a applicant that comes forward with a plan and the plan needs work, that's what staff is supposed to do to help that excuse me, to help that applicant become compliant as they do with every other aspect of a site plan or a preliminary plat, so that when it comes to the Planning Commission, it is a compliant plan that can be approved. In the event that there is rejected tree plan either by Community Development Director or by the IPC, that appeal would go to the Board of Commissioners. Okay, everybody's ready?
Just one thing. Sorry. I'm on page 10 or page 11. I guess we had a new page 11 come in. Just one thing, the Community Development Director consideration by her. It talks about expedited subdivisions, and then an appeal would go to the Board of Commissioners. In the subdivision regulations, section 801.3, the appeal goes to the IPC. So there's conflict.
Just an appeal of the tree plan.
So regardless of who your approving authority is for the tree plan, your appeal process would be the same route. It would go to the Board of Commissioners. I mean, we could change that. It just seems to be more streamlined just to do it that way.
Question about the plan itself. We talked about having a certified registered engineer do the plan. Take a photograph of all trees. This says all. It says all trees, 600 diameter, all species, for every tree.
And we're not talking about class pictures of every tree. We're talking about, each tree. Are you reading that to mean each tree individually? Is that your concern? Okay, it doesn't say.
It says that.
It does say that?
It says each tree.
Of all trees.
All trees.
Photograph of all trees, both removed, all trees are on preservation, and all green county trees above the park.
Okay. Well, but like I said, is the interpretation, I take a picture of every single tree in a single frame, or am I simply documenting the entire site? And maybe documenting the site is what we need to say.
Well, you take a picture of the trees, you want to get the size and the nature, location, and what kind of tree it is.
And so that's your, okay. Okay, I think that's something we need to work on because that was certainly not the intent.
Gary's a surveyor, and he interpreted it that way.
Well, that's why I said it's something we need to work on, because clearly we want to document the site because we have had situations in the past where trees have disappeared. So the site needs to be documented, but I agree with you that each, if you're interpreting that to mean each tree gets its own picture, that was not the intent.
Each tree has its own information too, right, in there? Each tree has a certain amount of information that's required for each tree.
Correct. And,
Right.
but those trees can be grouped just as they are now in the site plans, in the tree plans
And
that you get now.
you have a tree survey for all trees of 6 inches or greater. This is a 6-inch tree, the DVH, okay? That's about the size of a small telephone pole. I mean, it's so small. This is a very small tree. Why do we care about a 6-inch tree? Why aren't we talking about 20-inch trees? And I mean, if we're going to save and preserve trees, why not preserve a tree that's substantial? Why are we having to survey 6-inch trees? I think it's too small.
Okay. But they can also be surveyed in groups.
Gary's happy.
Okay, I think that's something that needs some effort then. All right, moving on to the tree protection during construction. We already require tree protection during construction in our existing ordinance. Continuing obligation to maintain trees is also part of the existing ordinance and it's carried over into the new ordinance. The Glynn County trees, we've already talked about the Glynn County trees and the concern that the tree board has about the fact that Glynn County trees are not always given the attention that they deserve either in the tree plan or during construction. Now, this is the last one that I think is probably going to take up the rest of our time, is the removal of a live oak greater than 38 inches, subject to review by the county arborist. We like to call it Bowles Rule. We recognize that we're here to protect the live oaks. The live oaks are our livelihood. Have y'all seen what people say about us?
No,
They talk about
Miriam.
the live oaks.
Miriam, in the essence of, we have limited time, so if we can just
Okay.
get to this issue.
I'll move on.
Thank you.
A live oak of 38 inches or greater, and this is diameter, so through the middle of the tree, 38 inches, which yields a circumference around the tree of about 10 feet. Also yields about 2,400 square feet of tree canopy and is about 125 to 150 years old. And this is an example of such a tree in the photograph to your right. So the ordinance proposes that an administrative permit be issued for anyone who wants to remove a live oak of 38 inches or greater. This is separate from the tree plan. If you're removing 38-inch trees in your tree plan, you do not have to take this additional step. This is one of those one-off, I'm taking out a 38-inch tree because I want to build a swimming pool or whatever. So the proposed ordinance provides for an administrative permit to be issued if it meets certain criteria. If the tree is dead, diseased, or damaged, if it conflicts with infrastructure. For example, this tree is very close to a structure. If it was found that this tree was adversely impacting the structure, unfortunately, that tree would have to be removed. Conflicting with a permitted use. If you have a 6,000 square foot lot and you're entitled to build a house and a 38-inch tree is sitting in the middle of that lot, that tree's going to go. Or if the tree poses a hazard to public health, safety, or welfare. This, again, was a compromise. What we heard at the town halls and afterwards was, you have all this stuff and there's all these requirements, but people are going to still cut down the big live oaks. What can we do about that? And so this was in response to that. If you compare other jurisdictions, 38-inch trees, the closest one I could find was in Charleston. You have to have a permit to cut a tree 24 inches or bigger. Fernandina, it's 6 inches. Most of the coastal communities in South Carolina who are direct competitors for those retirement dollars and visitors and residents, 6-inch tree can't be cut without a permit. So this is just one way of taking that step to say, guess what? We do protect the live oaks, and this is how we're going to do that. This will be an administrative permit issued through community development. Would be a one-page application. The tree cutters would know, I mean, this is not something you can take a chainsaw out of your garage and decide on Saturday afternoon you're going to cut that tree down. You're going to have to hire a tree service to do it. So it is going to take some implementation education, and it was just something that as one of the things that this committee looked hard at was protecting the live oaks, because that's really the purpose of everything we're doing.
I don't see the administrative permit in here. Did I miss it?
It's,
For that 38,
it may not use those exact words, but
it just says approval.
approval,
Doesn't
right.
say a
Right,
permit.
and as I said, it's not, it would be an administrative process, and we
And-
anticipate it would be a fairly
Did you
quick-
contemplate that they should replace it with something larger than a 4-inch tree?
We did, of course, but like I said, this is probably going to occur because most people, and again, you don't legislate for the angels, you legislate for that 5% that says, by God, I want my swimming pool, and I don't care about that tree. Well, then why did you buy the house with the beautiful tree? If you're going to cut down that tree, you do need to contribute to the tree canopy through replacement. And so the replacement is a 4-inch caliper tree or less. The reason for that is a very scientific botanical reason. If you take a small tree, and with our tree foundation, we plant 2-inch trees usually. If you plant a 2-inch and you plant a 4-inch, in 5 years they're going to be the same size. So that's why we don't say to plant something larger. But that is the requirement for the 38-inch live oaks or greater. And as I said, all of these trees are eligible for registration with the Live Oak Society. They are what makes our tree canopy. Any other questions? Okay, we have talked about Glynn County enforcement. Guess what? Violating the zoning ordinance is a misdemeanor. Always has been, always will be. This ordinance is no different. The existing ordinance, the proposed ordinance, violation is a misdemeanor. In the existing ordinance, the county retained the right to exercise other remedies. In the new ordinance, we have spelled those out a little more in detail. The county may issue a stop work order, require replanting, withhold a certificate of occupancy if that replanting remediation is not done or there's not a bond in place. I mean, obviously, you don't want to plant live oaks in August. Or the county could sue for damages. For example, the situation where the trees were damaged on the East Beach accreted land, that might be a cause of action. That was also a violation and was taken to court as a misdemeanor. So we're being very consistent with the existing ordinance as well as consistent with the violation of other zoning ordinances. It is a misdemeanor. And we do have in the ordinance, there's a tiered penalty level there for first, second, third offenses.
And I have a question on that. On number E, it says that you're going to penalize, you're going to collect a fine from the owner and from the architect, builder, contractor, or anybody else. So you're collecting from multiple people for a fine for the same event?
If they're bad actors, yes. The tree cutter, and this is one way that
And the owner and the architect.
maybe not each and every situation, but for example, the tree that was cut on the new Glen Haven property, the architect had no knowledge that it had happened. He would not be charged. However, the tree cutter should have said, where's your tree plan, where's your permit? That it's a very simple thing to do. In other jurisdictions, every bad actor up and down the food chain is charged with a violation. And of course, you know, if there's no probable cause to cite them, if the architect was on vacation in Florida the day that tree got cut, the architect is not going to be cited. It's those actors who are going to be cited.
According to this, the owner will always be cited,
Yes.
and anybody else.
And the other,
So
and the
they're going to
other,
be fined as well as the owner.
correct.
Okay.
As they should be, because the only way to enforce this, and enforcement was another thing that was very clear at the town hall meetings. Why do you have these rules? People get away with it, they just write a check. Well, that's why everybody's got to have a little skin in the game. If the tree cutter is going to be liable, if the project manager, the GC's on site, and that tree comes down and it wasn't supposed to, if he directed that activity, then he should be cited because he's violated the zoning ordinance. Any more questions about that? Okay. If you have any other questions, again, this is why we do what we do. It's, you know, we're not just tree huggers, but trees are a major economic driver in this community. And stormwater we don't have any better stormwater management than Old Oak. So that's why we feel very strongly that this ordinance is needed, and we appreciate your comments. I think we've made some progress to buff it up to the point where it's really going to be a great incentive for folks to come up with some creative ways to do things and to keep our tree canopy, because we are now below 50%. Between the development we've had on the island, we've had about 25 acres clear cut since we started this process 3 years ago, and we've had 2 storms. So it is something that's very necessary. Any more questions?
Thank you, Mary. So I just want to turn back the balance of our time to the commissioners, discuss, make comments. I took down a number of items that willing to clarify or change. Will, I don't know if you got all of these. We can review them. But I just want to ask, are there any general comments or concerns?
I guess enforcement, couple years down the road, 5 years down the road, who's the tree police, I guess? If you plant 3 or 4 2-inch trees and one gets run over or damaged or something, or your surveyor's cutting line through the backyard and cuts the 2-inch tree.
Yes, sir. So in our electronic review system, we're going to set up a notification that it's a tree plan property when it goes through this approval process, and then we can use our system to let us know when it's been a year, and we can do annual inspections of the property. I'm talking of an entire neighborhood.
I think you, at the last Board of Commissioners meeting, you said that your enforcement was complaint-driven.
The enforcement of the zoning ordinance items have been complaint-driven, but with this, to be proactive, once, for example, like with your site plan, we don't wait for a complaint on a site plan before they get to move to the next step. So this would just be following up on that for that 2-year main.
In fact, on page 3, it talks about items it talks about removal of trees, and item 8 talks about to repair the emergency. Basically, says if you lost a tree due to act of God or sometime, then you have to replace it for 3 years' time. I don't quite understand why that would be in the tree plan. Why take 2 or 3 trees down, and homeowner has to replace them with something?
Yeah, so this does not apply unless you have a tree plan.
Correct.
So those of us that lost trees last year, we don't have to go back. We're not excited about putting them back if they were on the roof, right?
Right, and I don't know where we got the phrase "in kind," but I would say if you lost a tenant, if you lost a 10-foot circumference tree, you're not going to, obviously you can't replace that. So you're just going to have to plant a new tree. And once you're outside that 2-year maintenance window, you would not have to replace it at all. Is that the way it's worded? You have a cure.
You fall below your minimum requirement.
That's exactly
True. Right.
Tornado or hurricane something destroys 3 of the 12 trees on your way to lot. You have to replace them.
You have to replant. You don't, I think as Mary said, you don't have to replace in the sense that you have to put the same size tree in place. You do have to, as written, the ordinance requires you to go and plant 3 new trees to replace those trees.
I can imagine trying to enforce that after a hurricane.
Also, in that section, we've got the word "et cetera" in there, and I don't think the word "et cetera" needs to be in an ordinance. It's ETC. That's on page 4. Under number 2, buildings and structures and acts of God and so forth. And I don't think "et cetera" is a proper thing for an ordinance.
Yeah, I agree with it. That et cetera is a dangerous way of leaving things because building inspectors love them. They work hard, but I think this opens things up to interpretation.